The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Tuesday, June 4th. Thank you for joining me. I hope you're having a great week, and I'm looking forward to a fantastic week before you. I think what I'm going to start with is just to recognize the significance of the date today. Today is, what is it now, 35 years? 35 years since, or 45 years, I can't do the math. It is 35 years since the massacre in Tiananmen Square today. So on June 4th, 1989, tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square, or maybe they appeared the day before. You remember the famous photo of Tank Man, and initially, nothing happened, and then at some point, the Chinese troops got the order, and they basically massacred the students demonstrating for greater freedom, greater political freedom in China. The students had accidentally, mistakenly, if you will, thought that given the economic freedom that they were gaining in China during the 1980s, that now was also the time to embrace political freedom, and they went into the streets demanding it. Deng and the Chinese leadership saw it very differently, had no intention of loosening the complete and utter 100% control of the Chinese Communist Party over the political landscape. And they, as a consequence, after weeks of trying to diffuse the situation, trying to get these students to go back home, they sent out the troops. It's I don't think as well known that there were students not just in Beijing, not just in Tiananmen Square, but there were tens of thousands of students all over China demonstrating, and that the massacre did not just happen in Tiananmen Square. It happened all over China. Thousands, probably tens of thousands, we might never know, or certainly we will never know as long as the Chinese Communist Party rules. Tens of thousands of Chinese were slaughtered that day, were killed. Their bodies were hidden very quickly, and the whole episode was written out of Chinese history books. It just doesn't exist. It never happened. Indeed, if you look at formal Chinese history, there were demonstrations. They were peacefully addressed. The demonstrators were a little rowdy, and some of the soldiers got hurt. But other than that, everybody went home, and everything continued as normal. The bloodshed of the massacre just disappeared. If you go to Tiananmen Square, you will find no commemoration of it, no remnant of it. And indeed, if you try to bring it up in China, you're either told you're talking nonsense, or you're told to be quiet, make sure the authorities can't hear you. Now, certainly there's a whole generation of Chinese who know what happened, who lived through what happened, many of whom survived what happened and were eyewitnesses to what happened, but they have kept quiet. Many Chinese escaped right after, including Tank Man. Tank Man lives, I think the last I read, he lives in Taiwan. He escaped China as a consequence, but has stayed quiet. They know that if they speak up, they will be hounded by Chinese agents all over the world and silenced. There are some Chinese dissidents who are active, who are active in telling the truth, who are active in standing up to the regime. But it is a minority of the Chinese that are outside China who will speak up. Most are just afraid, whether justifiably or not. They are just afraid. So one of the things I think it's important to note, one of the things that's important to note, is that if you go on Twitter today and you look at and you search under Tiananmen Square, you are more likely to find stories denying it ever happened than stories that talk about it and commemorate it. There are hundreds of either Chinese agents or bots or whatever, or just people who are being paid by the Chinese, or just people who are willing to comply with Chinese propaganda. And there's a whole video story about how, look, nothing happened to Tank Man. Look, nothing happened to the people in Tiananmen Square. They show photos, they show videos. Today, in the world of AI, they can show whatever they want. And all in the name of, look, here's proof. It never happened. It's all a myth. It's all Western propaganda, anti-Chinese, racist Western propaganda. The Chinese military would never do anything like this, and it never actually happened. And many of these accounts look like they're legit. They look like the Western accounts, and who knows, what drives them. But I was pretty surprised when I was looking for, like, on Twitter for stories about this. The number of, the amount of misinformation was just stunning. And every post that kind of commemorates it, immediately underneath it, there are comments saying, no, it never happened. What are you talking about? So generally, when you are on Twitter or on any social media site, beware. Because while there's a lot to be gained there and there's a lot of interesting news, and as of this morning, I read somewhere Twitter is allowing pornography on Twitter, so lots of stuff that you can get on Twitter that might be of value to you. There's also a lot of misinformation, a lot of bots, a lot of propaganda. I don't know if Twitter cares, if its policy is let it rip, or if Twitter tries to screen some of it out when they know it's a foreign agent, but just can't deal with the volume. I don't know. I'm not sure what the Twitter policies are, but the reality is really quite stunning. Really quite stunning. So check it out. All right. Check out all the deniers on Twitter and be aware of what is going on. But yes, 35 years to the massacre in Tiananmen Square, a massacre that I think we know that China will not change. China will not change until whoever is in the government in China recognizes what happens, admits what happens, and views this as a sad day for China, and maybe even has some kind of commemoration for what happened that day. As long as this denial, am I doing the math wrong? It's 26 years. No, it can't be 26 years. 89. I don't know. 26 years. Jennifer must be relating to something else, not this. Oh wait. No, she says, not that. 35 years. All right. So it's a good time to remember how bad things can be. How bad things can be. What totalitarianism looks like. What even when you have some economic freedom, but when your political freedom is denied from you, what can actually happen? What can actually happen? All right. Let's move on to the story everybody seems to be talking about out there, and that is Fauci's testimony yesterday in front of Congress. Fauci, of course, was the scientist that seemed to be, who was, of course, he's now retired, retired in 2022, the head of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and basically, out of nowhere, really, ran COVID response for the federal government under Trump and then under Biden. It was never the job of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases to do so. It was not his job, but there you go. He landed up for a variety of reasons doing that job. And yesterday was in front of Congress, and if you want a good illustration of the state of tribal politics in America today, watch that hearing. It was completely uninformative. It was a complete show of, by the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene was just at her best in terms of showing what a complete and utter, just simple nutcase she is. She's just nuts, completely nuts. Anyway, here's an opportunity to actually investigate, and it needs investigation, the complete and utter failure of the American government to deal with COVID. It was a complete and utter failure in many dimensions. We've talked about this, from the very fact that its primary tool of dealing with COVID was rights violation, whether it was lockdowns, all kinds of mandates at the federal and at the state level, shutting down life, shutting down business, shutting down production, bailing everybody out by printing money, giving half-baked advice in terms of medical advice, giving some outright ridiculous advice from the president, massive misinformation, to the extent that people stopped trusting medical authorities, period, during this period. This is just a massive, unequivocal failure of government. And it actually really needs an investigation. It needs real hearings. And it needs asking some tough questions of people like Fauci. Fauci was there. And, why did the federal government do what it did? Why were the recommendations what they were? Why did they wait until March to have any recommendations? Why did the CDC insist on its own COVID test? Why wasn't the protocol of testing and isolating followed? Why were these other protocols followed? What happened in January, February, March, and for until really mid 2021? This is one of the biggest, maybe the biggest failures of the American government in all of American history. And yet, they bring Fauci in, and none of those questions asked seriously. No discussion is had about what actually happened. The Democrats want to use this opportunity to hail him and congratulate him and how wonderful it is that he followed the science. Republicans want to lambaste him for all kinds of things. I have no idea. Marjorie Taylor Greene had pictures there of dead dogs. I guess part of it is research that supposedly he funded that resulted in dogs dying. I don't know. But nothing to do with this. Mainly focused on the lab leak theory versus natural cause, the jumping from an animal theory. The consensus seems to be that it was more likely a lab leak than anything else. But that was the entire focus, and then emails and hiding and communication. Look, Fauci said and did some really bad things. But it was unfocused, uninteresting, and really unfocused on the things that really matter. Like, what could we learn from this? And of course, the reason for this is nobody actually wants to deal with the truth. Nobody actually wants to think through what happened, why it happened, and whose fault it is. Republicans certainly don't want everybody to know how completely and utterly pathetic Donald Trump was during this. I mean, Donald Trump lost any claim to be president of the United States just based on a treatment, just based on his behavior during COVID. He did what I think he and most politicians do very, very well. He stuck his head in the sand for most of it. You know, during January, February. Then he woke up in March and panicked and then accused the city of New York for not shutting down and not doing lockdowns earlier. He basically fired the CDC, did not allow them to actually do their job, which is to handle the COVID situation. That is why Fauci found himself in the position that he did. Basically let Fauci and Collins run things rather than, as the executive, as the president, taking the reins and making the political decisions. I mean, this was a complete and utter disaster orchestrated by Trump. And the Republicans don't want that to come out. They don't want it to come out how utterly incompetent the administration, and particularly Trump himself, were around this. They would rather still talk about ivermectin and all these other discredited solutions. They would rather talk about Fauci's emails and all of that. But let's dig into what actually happened. What failed? Where it failed? How it failed? Who failed? How it got as bad as it did? No interest in actually figuring out, and therefore, as a consequence of that, very little chance that if this ever happens again, we'll actually do the right thing. Now, again, I don't think Fauci is free of blame. I think he is blameworthy for a lot of this. I think his recommendations were, in many respects, awful. But it's the political class that accepted them. It's the executive branch that actually executes on these things. You know, the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease doesn't have any actual power. The power lies in those who are his bosses, primarily the President of the United States. The President of the United States was too worried about bleach and all kinds of other nonsense, and in convincing himself, because ultimately he has he had the what do you call it? Yeah, I lost my thought. Anyway, you know, Trump cut no red tape except for the vaccines. The only red tape Trump cut, the only success he had, the only thing he did right was fast-track the vaccines. And to the extent that he did that, he should be praised. But of course, that is the one thing Trump is running away from. The one thing Trump doesn't want to acknowledge his success in. The one thing Republicans refuse to acknowledge. But no, Trump was an absolute disaster starting in January, and was told by people within his administration, this needs to be taken seriously. You actually have to do something here. And Trump was like, no, this is going to go away by itself. It's no problem. Forget about it. Don't worry about this. And this is not hindsight. This is, at the time, people were talking about this. Throughout February, people were talking about this. And the fact that Trump signed off on massive lockdowns, that's the reality. And urged massive lockdowns. The fact that the CDC did not allow COVID tests from outside the country or from non-government entities to be used, to be spread around until it designed its own test and then discovered that its test was no good, is a fact. That's a massive failure of government. But the instinct of the CDC to say, no, nobody does test, only we design the test, where does that even come from? And where are the people who made that decision? Where are the people who made that call? Why are they not? Because testing is unimportant. It was unimportant to most people after COVID. Who cares about testing? But testing is the protocol that everybody in the field advocated for at the time. But now it's not, this is the point, it's not about truth anymore. It's not about reality. It's not about what worked and what didn't, who is right and who is wrong. I mean, there were people right and wrong. We need to evaluate it. We need to, with hindsight, we need to determine who is right and who is wrong in order to be able to have a better response next time. But there's no discussion about these things. No discussion about these things. So that no lessons learned, zero lessons learned. We're even going to elect Trump to another term. That's that's as bad as a lesson as you could get, is to actually elect the guy in charge of the fiasco to another term, which is what it looks like. It looks like is going to be done. But there are real lessons to be learned here, and there are real good guys and real bad guys, and there needs to be a real reckoning, and this isn't it. This isn't it. And the demonization of people who had alternative views, and just the whole process by both sides. So, the point I want to make was basically what it all boils down to is that the hearing yesterday was just my tribe versus their tribe. It was just a tribal exercise, right? The Democrats have a certain position on COVID. Everybody has to line up on the position of COVID. It's not even that sophisticated, because they had a sophisticated position on COVID. They would be blaming the Trump administration. They would be blaming Fauci as a member of the Trump administration. They would be blaming the Trump administration for the things that Trump did wrong. But they don't even do that. They're not sophisticated enough to do that. And Fauci's one of theirs, so they can't go after Fauci, right? And of course, the Republicans have to be anti-Fauci, anti-vaccine, anti-everything that happened, and blame it all. And Ron DeSantis is the only hero in the whole story, even though Ron DeSantis locked down Florida, opened it up only after Georgia opened itself up. And of course, when Georgia opened up, Donald Trump lambasted them for opening up before he allowed them to open up. And again, none of that is anything the Republicans want to consider, want to talk about, want to think about. It's not what the tribe has been conditioned to. The tribe has been conditioned to Trump good, dealt with COVID right. The real catastrophe in COVID was Fauci and the vaccines. Fauci and the vaccines. And the fact that Trump was behind the vaccines or facilitated them or made them easier, and that's one good thing he did, we're not going to pay attention to that. No, that's all BS. I mean, this is what you saw in Congress yesterday was tribalism on steroids. This is American governance today is not ruled by facts. It's not ruled by evidence. It's not ruled by logic, reason, thought. It's ruled by the tribe and loyalty to the tribe and commitment to whatever the tribe drives. And it is pathetic. I'll add to that the fact that, children were masked, schools were closed. I mean, how absurd was that schools were closed? Early on, it was known that children didn't get the virus. And early on, I remember this, already in March, it was known that the real danger was the elderly, not to children, not even to young adults, the elderly. You could see that in the data coming out of China, which turned out to be quite accurate at the end of the day. I'm not sure the sheer numbers were accurate, but at least the breakdowns were accurate. But again, COVID was not dealt with from the perspective of an adult, from the perspective of thinking through, looking at the data, analyzing it, and coming up with a rational strategy that both respected rights and respected the science. Science was thrown out very early in the name of tribal affiliation. And certainly in the postmortem, certainly in the analysis of what happened in the past, science is being thrown out. And all we're left with is tribal alliance. Allegiance, alliance. Well, I mean, the solution that should have been practiced was isolate the vulnerable, i.e. old people and anybody else who had a pre-existing condition that was vulnerable. Isolate them, don't isolate children. And don't bring children home where they're just as exposed to the elderly. Isolate the elderly. Isolate the people who are vulnerable and let everybody else live normal lives. That should have always been the solution. And indeed, that is the solution written in CDC guidelines in terms of how to deal with the pandemic. And then test. And you know, that's it. Should have never isolated or try to shut it, mask children and mask children well into 2022. Closed schools for almost 2 years. Insanity. Simple insanity. I mean, completely divorced from science, completely divorced from logic. But if you said that, you were obviously on one side of a tribal dispute, and nothing was really put up vis-a-vis, again, logic, science, and everything else. All right, one of the things making the rounds on Twitter is video of this debate that happened, I guess, a few days ago, around Hamas, Israel, 2 against 2, and so on. And one of the participants in the debate was a woman who is a Bernie Sanders spokesman and a co-host of The Hill TV's Rising. That's the name of the show. Her name's Briahna Joy Gray. And basically, Briahna Joy Gray, dominated the debate. You could argue she won the debate. She was clearly articulate, passionate, dominant, silenced the opposition to a large extent, and dominated the stage, wouldn't let people talk. Anyway, her argument was, and this is me quoting her, when Hamas is talking about eliminating Israel, it's talking about not killing all the Jews, really. It's about eliminating the idea of a Jewish state, an ethno-national state, and having a state more like we have in America. Anyway, so Briahna Joy Gray is arguing that Hamas's true vision for a post, for a Hamas victory is not killing of Jews. No, they would never do that. And it's not establishing Sharia law and putting women in hijabs and throwing gays off of tall buildings. No, none of that is the real Hamas. Hamas's actually motivation is to have a secular state where Jews and Arabs can live side by side, where individual rights are protected, where we just have a free, wonderful state in which everybody lives together. God, if I'd known that, I would have voted Hamas. I mean, that's exactly my vision. Ultimately, in the very long run, when the circumstances are right for Israel, that is an amazing vision. She argued that this is expressed in the revision to the Hamas Charter, which is nonsense. Hamas charter was never revised. They never actually accepted the revisions. And even in the revisions, that's not what it said. There's no way that would be, ever said. People laughed at the statement. Her other participants in the debate laughed at the statements. And she was very upset by the whole debate and stormed out kind of in anger. She went up to the event organizer. By the way, Konstantin Kisin was the moderator of this debate. He went up to the debate organizer and said to him, yelled at him as she, is walking out, throwing her stuff. And she says, "This is the most Islamophobic, racist audience I've ever seen. It's disgusting. I hope someone drops a bomb on this entire building." This is what you get. This is this wonderful state like we have here in America, where nobody kills anybody and everybody lives in peace, and we all respect the rights and the divergence of opinions that we have. I mean, this is somebody prominent at the Hill and a Bernie Sanders advisor. The level of complete delusion, self-delusion, the level of complete willingness to just utterly, unequivocally evade reality when it seems convenient, evade reality in order to justify one's whole, oppressed oppressor theory and convictions. Truly stunning. I mean, truly stunning. How people are willing to evade in the name of their ideology, and and just ignore reality. Just look at reality, face reality, and just ignore it. It's not there. It doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. We'll talk about Hamas in the second part of the show after we do the news. We'll talk about Hamas and its Islamic and its relationship to Islam and what that means and what that implies and all of that. But let me just be very, very clear. Even if it's true that if Hamas wins, they wouldn't kill every single Jew, they certainly will kill many of them. And then what they want and what they intend and what they have always said they want and intend and what they continue to want and intend is the establishment of a Sharia law Islamic state in the river to the sea, where if there are any Jews that still survive that haven't been put on boats and drifted into the Mediterranean or murdered, slaughtered, whatever Jews are left are either slaves to the Muslims. Slavery, by the way, is encouraged in Islam. Or they are second-hand citizens who, by the way, cannot and are not allowed to own property on Islamic lands. They would be basically second-hand citizens in an Islamic state of Palestine, which would just be one step in the ultimate goal of course, a worldwide Islamic state and the imposition of Sharia over everything. That is what they believe. That is what they hold. That is what they want. That is what they advocate for. They keep saying it over and over and over again. And again, we'll get to more details about that. Yes, this is what the left has come to. Not just saying, Nakba, Israel's bad, Palestine, the Hamas is just fighting a, war against an oppressor. But now Hamas are the founding fathers. Hamas just wants to establish a wonderful, peaceful, rights-respecting country, the equivalent of the United States. I mean, where do these people come off, and how do they get so delusional? And just think of living your life at that level of evasion. Anyway, Konstantin Kisin has been trying to put her in place on Twitter. Unfortunately, it doesn't take on the sheer absurdity of what she actually says. It's more that she's gone after him on Twitter he was a biased moderator or whatever, and he's replied, and it's a back and forth, and you can check it out on your favorite social media platform, X. Just don't search for Tiananmen Square on X, because as I said, you'll get a lot of Chinese propaganda. X is flooded with it right now. All right, some pretty startling news out of India. We don't have final numbers. We talked about this yesterday. We talked about the election. And yesterday, the consensus was, based on exit polls, was that Modi's government was going to achieve a massive, huge win. And that they were going to increase their majority. And that this was a huge win for him and his allies. And the stock market in India went up in anticipation of this, and that he was going to be able to continue his pro-Hindu reforms. And, well, it turns out that's not what happened. It's not clear whether he will even have a majority in the House of Parliament. He might, so the numbers are not in. But what seems to be very clear is that compared to how he did in 2019, he has done a lot worse. That if he has an outright majority, it will be very small. If he doesn't, he will have to form a coalition. And he has political allies that he can form a coalition with. So it's still true that Modi will be the next prime minister of India and will be, the leader of India for the next 5 years. But this has to be an unbelievably disappointing result for Modi and, again, his political supporters. He clearly promised going into this election cycle that this would be a dominant cycle, that he would have a dominant majority, and that he would get all these things passed because the majority would be so solid. There was even thought that he and his allies, other small political parties, could win a 2/3 majority, which would give them all kinds of ability to constitutionally to really make a huge difference, really change stuff. Well, no, the opposition has done very, very well. Opposition party has done much better than expected. And, this is going to put Modi on his heels. The primary issue in India, surprisingly, because it's not a primary issue here or anywhere else, well, maybe it is. The primary issue may be like here, so really. It was the economy, and the fact that a lot of Indians feel left behind, the fact that a lot of the progress that, Modi has focused so much on Hindu nationalism and putting the Muslims in their place and focusing on strengthening his power and control over Indian politics, that he has not done what is necessary to support farmers, or what ideally would happen is there'd just be a lot less farmers in India. I think it's still true that about half households in India get their income from farming, which is absurd, right? I mean, think about in the United States, it's less than 1%. You want to move away from a farming economy, and this is what India should. It's the most populous country in the world, but it would stay poor as long as it relies on small family farms for food manufacturing. But the reality is, the opposition maybe promised farmers more than Modi did. The reality is that just like everywhere else in the world, the competition between Modi and the opposition is a competition between two statist political parties. Statist political parties offering other people's money, left and right, regulating, controlling, manipulating, having industrial policy and everything else. Some of that works some of the time, but in the long run, it fails. And you can only offer so much of other people's money to so many people. And when you're running the largest country in the world, and it's not a very rich country, the money's going to run out. Anyway, I don't know what lessons are going to be learned from this. I have no idea, but this is unquestionably a severe setback for the ruling party. They will still rule with less power. And the reality is that somebody maybe somebody will realize that what India needs is more economic reforms, more privatization, more movement towards a free economy, more movement towards capitalism rather than less. And we'll see if that happens. But that is the direction India needs to move, just like every other country needs to move. And just like in every other country, it seems the voices for that just don't exist. They certainly are not in the opposition, and they're not in Modi's party. But maybe Modi, my guess is his solution will be double up on statist policies to redistribute wealth. And let me just say to the comment on the chat, anarchy is statism. It's a form of statism because it ultimately leads to statism. Anarchy is gang rule, which is what we have in Mexico, for example, in many of its provinces. That's anarchy. And that is a form of statism. It's just now the state is a gun. It is the explicit gun. It is violence. The state is whoever happens to have a bigger gun wins. So anarchy is not a solution to statism. Anarchy is a way of making the statism the ugliest it can be. The solution to statism is America. It's America at its founding. The solution to statism is a state dedicated to the protection of individual rights. And then it's a state founded on principles of individualism. It's a state that is anti-growth of the state beyond its limited function. Its limited function of protecting individual rights. But if you eliminate a state as a protector of individual rights, what you get is, anarchy, which is a unmitigated, violent disaster. What you get is gang warfare, and what you get is bloodshed in the street. What you get is much worse than the worst statist you can imagine in the world today. All right, just a clarification. I think Rothbard, I'm gonna answer because I think the questions are asked honestly. I think Rothbard is a good economist and a terrible thinker about anything other than economics, and that he draws conclusions. And even his economics is flawed in his history. His history is often just made up in order to, so I really despise Rothbard. But some of his economics is really good. He studied with von Mises. It better be good, right? The greatest economist ever. But anytime he got into history, he distorts the history in order to make his point, including the history of banking in the 19th century in the United States, which I know something about, and Rothbard gets completely wrong. And his politics and ethics are completely distorted, completely wrong. And from a moral perspective, he's one of the most despicable, horrible people that I've read. One, from the perspective of how he treats Ayn Rand, and second, from the perspective of how he treats America. He hates America. He despises the United States of America, when the United States of America is, with all its flaws, with all its problems, with all the things going on, is a great country. It's a great country in which we live in relative freedom, and should be celebrated. And what should be fought against are the distortions and perversions that have moved us away from even more greatness. But Rothbard, I've mentioned this. I read it somewhere. I can't remember the source of it, but nobody's ever really denied this. Rothbard used to celebrate every time an American pilot was shot down over Vietnam. He said Stalin was less bad than the American government. I mean, really, that is so evil, so despicable. And it explains the complete nuttiness and complete horror of the Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus. It just is horrific, horrible, despicable. And, libertarians need to realize that the anarchists among them are a destructive force. In particular, the anarchists who are of the Murray Rothbard, Hans Hermann Hoppe Hope, or whatever you call it, or however you pronounce his names, breed. They are unbelievably destructive. They're destructive to human life, and they're destructive to any kind of political free market project libertarians might be for, by affiliating with these anarchists who hate America, hate countries like Israel, because they're good countries, because they actually protect rights, because people actually flourish there. And they're bad countries because of all the rights violations but overall, they're good. In comparison to what's available in the world, in comparison to human history, they're good. By denouncing the good, they are feeding evil. All right, let's see. Mexican election. So in India, everybody's like, oh my God, Modi might actually not have a majority. This is stunning and upsetting, I guess, to business interests, because Modi, made, Modi basically, had favored business interests. India is a very crony country, and those business interests are panicking because their supporter might not have as much power as they thought he will. The opposite is true in Mexico. In Mexico, markets, expected the victory that was, but suddenly they realized, oh my God, she's not only won, but her political party might actually win 2/3 of the votes in parliament. And the consequence of that is, so yesterday the stock market went up because she won, and then today it's tumbling because, oh my God, if she gets 2/3, she's a leftist, she could change the Constitution, as AMLO, her predecessor, tried to do, make the presidency far more imperial, make it more authoritarian. She could do things from an economic perspective that the Mexican Constitution might not allow today. She could actually make possible, because she would have 2/3. She could override the Constitution or rewrite the Constitution. And suddenly Mexicans are panicking and waiting for the final votes to be counted in Parliament to see whether this political party, the political party of the center left, or really maybe you could argue the populist left, how much it actually wins. And the extent to which right, this is a populist authoritarian left, and if they get 2/3, they dominate. This is really, 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 really scary and bad, right? Yeah. All right. Let's see. So exact opposite. Mexican president was elected with too big of a margin, and people are panicking, as they should. I think she's going to be better than AMLO, but I'm not sure. And, to the extent that AMLO still pulls the strings for her political party, AMLO was an authoritarian. AMLO wanted to change the Constitution to give himself this massive amount of power. Now that could be done if they gain this majority. All right, staying on the theme of election and politics, British politics, as we know, we're 1 month exactly away, 4th of July, 1 month exactly away from elections in the UK. Elections that it looks like pretty unequivocally that the Conservatives are just going to be clobbered. It definitely looks like Labour is going to win these elections. And the Conservative Party is going to probably take its biggest defeat since I think I saw 1906 or something like that. A stunning defeat. In other words, Labour will have a bigger majority than just a few years ago Johnson had when the Conservatives just swept in and had a straight majority in Parliament. Now Labour will have it, which is pretty scary if you know Labour, right? And so this is going on. At the same time, at the same time, Conservatives are seeing a rise in an alternative to them on the right, which is the Reform Party led by Nigel Farage. But Nigel Farage had said, as soon as 2 weeks ago, that he was not going to run. He was not going to run in the British elections because he was going to be busy helping Donald Trump get elected, and that was more important. So he was going to spending his time in the United States, and he didn't have time to run. And I think the Conservatives kind of sighed a sigh of relief because not having Nigel Farage, who's very charismatic, who is the architect behind Brexit, breathing down their neck, they viewed would be a good thing, and it wouldn't take votes away from them, right? So the Reform Party would be weakened by it. Anyway, yesterday, Nigel Farage announced that he will indeed run, that he will run for elections. He will run for elections as part of the Reform Party in this one area of Britain, which means the Reform Party will be incredibly invigorated, which means that the vote on the right will be split between Conservatives and Reforms, which increases the probability that basically the Conservative Party is going to get wiped out. It's going to be a bloodbath. It's going to be a bloodbath. He announced this a day before a debate was going to happen on television between the head of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, I think to weaken the Conservative Party. And some think that this is a play by Nigel Farage to basically, ultimately, after the elections, after the Tories, the Conservatives have been wiped out, to make a play to take over the Conservative Party, to make the Conservative Party a Nigel Farage political party. I mean, Farage is awful. He is kind of the combination of the worst elements of the right. He doesn't bring any of the good stuff of the right to the table. He is completely focused on all the nationalist, xenophobic, anti-individual rights. He's not for freedom and free trade and free markets and all of that. And he brought about what's turned into a complete disaster in the UK, which is Brexit. I guess there's still a way for them to recover from it, but so far it's been a disaster. But I think he ultimately is the guy to represent the right. He is the guy. He just like in the United States, he is the guy that is best to represent the bankruptcy of the right. He is the guy to represent the fact that the right is mindless and mindless and programless and idealless, and so that's what we have. We have a left that is mindless and a right that is mindless. So Nigel Farage wants to bring the amazing quality of American politics to the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom, I guess, the Conservatives deserve it. I mean, there was, just like in the United States, I think, there was a little opening for the Conservative Party to actually do great things. I think that Truss had an opportunity to do something. I think they had some people running in the Conservative Party who really believe in free markets and liberty and good stuff, and the good stuff and the right stuff. And that was awful. Farage has nothing in common with Margaret Thatcher. He is Trump. He's Trump. Trump with, I think, more charisma than Trump. But he is Trump. He is more mindlessness and more complete disastrous policies and a rejection of the very foundations of a Thatcher-like approach to governance, which is a respect for the individual and a respect for markets. Farage has none of that. Trump has none of that. Kemi Badenoch was the best, I thought, of the candidates. I think I told you that I've met Kemi. I was impressed by her, and we once in a while exchange a message on Twitter. But she's too good to win. And she was in this last government of the Brits, and I think she got a little corrupted by being there and didn't stick to her guns and didn't insist on sticking to the program, and as a consequence has got significantly diluted. Anyway, when the day comes that when the right shrugs off the Nigel Farages and the Trumps of the world, we'll know we're heading in the right direction. In the meantime, we are not. We are heading towards, we're slowly, luckily it's slowly, but it's definitely slowly moving towards authoritarianism of the right, of the left, of the center. Doesn't matter. Authoritarianism, doesn't matter who wins. The authoritarian tendency is the dominant one from all of them. Yep. Let's see. Quickly, Biden said something like, Bibi's just trying to extend this war in order to preserve his political power. I mean, finally, Biden has said something true. And I don't think he said it for the right reasons. I don't think he knows how true it is. I think it was basically, that's been true since October 7th. Bibi has been extending this war as much as he can in order to resist winning and actually having to face the electorate, extending the war in order to try to make the case that he's the only one who could win it. I mean, whether Bibi's doing this consciously, which would make him really, really evil, or whether it's just his modus operandi and this is just how he does it, is really hard to tell. But Bibi Netanyahu needs to go. He needed to go on October 8th. He needs to go today. He needs to go yesterday. He needs to be out of there. This war should have been over months ago. It should be over tomorrow. It needs a better leader than Netanyahu. And so on this, I agree with Biden, even though Biden's saying it for all the wrong reasons. And Biden is an embarrassment and a complete sellout. Yep. All right. Let's see. What should we do at this point? That is Farage. All right. We're just going to keep that. All right. Need a swig of water. All right, so let me remind everybody, because we're way behind. We haven't been this behind on a show in a long time. So we're way behind on our goals. Remember, it's about $250 an hour. So the first hour, we should be at $250. Very few questions, too. We usually are far better off in terms of questions than what we have right now. So I encourage you guys to jump in with some questions and show support with stickers. We've got a significant number of people watching live, so it's not a shortage of people watching. But it is a shortage of people supporting the show while we watch. So please consider supporting the show if you value this. If you want to trade, if you're not just here to free ride off of those who do support the show, please consider doing like RDF just did, a $2 sticker, $5 sticker, $100 sticker, $500 sticker, whatever you can afford and whatever value this represents to you. Please consider that. Anytime you want to ask me anything and you want to get my direct response and you want to guarantee that response, because I always respond, you can use the you can use the super chat feature. The super chat feature is right there. I don't typically answer questions in the chat. Once in a while, I make an exception, but it's an exception, and I'm not going to do it again today. So if you want to ask a question, use the super chat or convince somebody to use the super chat on your behalf. Yeah, I mean, the reality is I need to get paid for my time. And one way to pay me for my time in order to do this is through the super chat. This is listener supported radio. This is listener supported podcast, YouTube channel. I can't do this without your help. So thank you. Thank you for all of you who do support the show financially, whether it's monthly over Patreon or whether it's here and the other platforms or whether it's here on the Super Chat. Really, really appreciate it. All right, here's a positive story that I don't know, might surprise many of you, maybe not those of you who live in Michigan. But I read the story and it was kind of cool. This is a cool story. And the story is really about Detroit, right? Detroit, which was 11 years ago, filed for bankruptcy. I remember 10, 11 years ago driving through Detroit. What a disaster. It looked like a war zone. It was, I mean, the buildings were crumbling. I mean, there's some beautiful buildings in Detroit from Art Deco Art Deco buildings. Beautiful designs, but the buildings are run down, dirty. A lot of empty lots, a lot of just abandoned buildings, a lot of abandoned homes, a lot of abandoned everything. And crime, Detroit was a top in all the listings of crime, or very close to the top. It was a disaster zone. Nobody went downtown. There was nothing to do in downtown. People didn't want to go to downtown, and downtown was basically dangerous. Over the last 10 years, there has been a transformation. Now, not all Detroit's problems are gone. Still has too high of a crime rate. There's still 30% of the Detroit population lives in poverty. But there has been a real transformation. And what is fascinating about the transformation of Detroit, and we're talking about downtown Detroit here, the downtown, is that it was not led by some charismatic mayor. It was not led by people in government. But this is a transformation led by entrepreneurs, led by billionaires. And yes, the Tigers are getting better, the Detroit Tigers, and partially, I think the stadium is getting better. And the whole area around the stadium is in development and getting better. And a lot of this was basically made possible. Thank you, Nathaniel Andreessen. Thank you from Norway. I have so many people listening to this show from Norway. How come I cannot get an invitation to come and give a talk in Norway? Why can't we get like a student group in Bergen or in Oslo to invite me to do a debate, to invite me to do a talk, to invite me to do something in Norway, right? So, because per capita, probably more people listen to me in Norway than anywhere else. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly close, right? And I'm trying, in the fall, I'm going to be in Europe, and I'd like to come to Norway to give a talk at Bergen is not north. Bergen is actually west. It's kind of northwest of Oslo. You go up the mountains and down the mountains, and Bergen is right on the fjords on the other side of the mountains. It's not way up north. Why is there nobody in Oslo who has like connections with one of the universities and gets me an invitation to give a talk? November. I mean, isn't that like the best time of year to visit Norway? It must be the best time of year. I'm sure the weather, sun is shining, days are long, it's warm and pleasant. Anyway, even though it's going to be unbelievably cold, rainy or snowy, horrible weather, I'm willing to go You know, and you'd think that so many people, again, so many people in no way follow this show that we could find one invitation. Anyway, if somebody is willing to do this, if somebody can arrange an invitation for me to come and speak at a university, not just a bunch of objectivists, but at a university, I want virgins in a sense that have not heard my talk before, have not heard about objectivism before, then if there's anybody out there who has any connections, and by the way, this is true everywhere in the world. I mean, there are a few places I won't go, but pretty much anywhere in the world, if you can arrange a talk for me at a university or in front of some other group of people who've never heard about Ayn Rand's ideas, and I can introduce them to them, you know, a group of, quote, virgins to philosophy, then please do it. Organize the talk and email me. Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. I will go to Norway, Sweden, Finland, even in November. But anyway, you know, Balkan states, Spain, Portugal, I'm already going. Poland, you know, just make it happen. Come on. There's got to be some demand for a talk on capitalism, or a talk on, you know, the Middle East, or just let me know. We need a good audience, right? 100 people would be good. Right? Let's take out all the stops. We need a good audience. So organize something where there's a good audience, and at a university of somewhere, and invite me. Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. Even in Detroit, I'm willing to come to Detroit. All right. So yes, we've already got a program in. For the November, I will be in Portugal, both in Lisbon and Porto. I'll be in Düsseldorf, in Germany, giving a talk. I've been invited to Cambridge University. I'll be participating in the debate, the Cambridge Union famous debates. I'll be doing a debate at Cambridge. And God, one other place. I think we've got something going on in Madrid. But yeah, please, if you know of anything, if you have anything anywhere in the world, including the United States, where you would like to have me come and speak, just send me an email. Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. Don't send me an email, you should come to this in this country. No, I mean, you need to get me an invitation by a credible, by credible people who will actually organize an event. I'll even go to Canada. How about that? Even to Canada, even in November or December. I can't go in November. I'm going to Europe in November. But even in December in Canada, I'll even go to Canada. I'll risk jail. But you have to get me an invitation from a university. Calgary, I'll go to Calgary. Absolutely, I'll go to Calgary. Windsor. Yeah, anyway, just get me any invitation. 100 people, invitation, I'll come. I don't know. This is standard practice, right? Yeah, Calgary in November is fine, she says to somebody who lives in Puerto Rico. Right. Do it, people. Jennifer does it every year. Jennifer gets me invitations from different groups in different parts of the country. Up in particularly Michigan. But you guys, yeah, learn from Jessica. Arrange for me little local regional tours to talk to students. I'm not a wimp. I'm willing to come. I'm going to complain about it, but I will come. And if you can't complain about stuff, then there's no point in doing anything, right? Anyway, Detroit is being transformed. Detroit is being transformed primarily because of one billionaire, with some help from others, but primarily Dan Gilbert, who is a billionaire. He founded a rocket company, and I think he's involved in Quicken or QuickBooks or something like that. Anyway, he and others, including the Fords and others, are basically now own almost all the commercial real estate in downtown Detroit. They own all the land and commercial real estate. I think, oh, here it is. They've amassed 70% of downtown office space. And this includes the Ford family and the Illich family, right? Which I guess is wealthy because of Little Caesar's Pizza. And they are transforming. They're taking older buildings, nice old buildings, and they're renovating them. They're cleaning them up and they're making them nice. As Robert says in the chat, but is also confirmed in an article that I was reading from. The new Hudson building is really nice. And it looks like they're creating an environment in which there are now nice restaurants in downtown. There are entertainment facilities in downtown. They're trying to really rejuvenate the ballpark, the whole area of the Tigers and the ballpark there. As Jennifer mentions, the train station has been renovated and converted into a kind of a fun place where people can hang out and where there is their offices and other things. There are fancy and expensive restaurants. It looks like there are a lot of condo buildings going up. I mean, really condo buildings, really nice condo buildings, expensive $1 million condos that are going up. I see a picture here of the residence at the Detroit Edition. Edition is kind of a high-end hotel brand that is owned by Marriott. Half the hotel brands are owned by Marriott, but it's a high-end hotel brand that's owned by Marriott, and they're going to be residents, which are going to be really, really nice and get all the amenities of a hotel, and it's going to be super beautiful. Anyway, they're pouring in billions and billions of dollars, private enterprise in to revitalize downtown Detroit. The idea is that by doing so, they are going to make money. They're not doing this just out of philanthropy. They're not doing just to help the city of Detroit out of the goodness of their heart. They intend to make money out of this, which is fantastic. This is exciting. It's fun to see. It's fun to see private enterprise really at the forefront of this. Remember, Detroit, Michigan generally, was the Silicon Valley of America of the late 19th century, early 20th century. If you were an entrepreneur, if you were an innovator, if you had a new idea for a new type of business, you went to Detroit. This is why, ultimately, the automobile industry landed up being in the Detroit area. This is why Dow went to Michigan to start his chemical company. This was the most exciting, vibrant, dynamic business place in the country. There is a lot of old and now new wealth in Michigan. And it's great to see, Detroit revitalized. And it really does give you a sense of, as bad as things get, there is a way out. There is a way out. There's still good people out there. There's still creative people out there. There's still people making stuff and building stuff. And, as long as there's investment and as long as wealth is being created, that wealth will be reinvested. And, if you can resurrect Detroit, you can resurrect anywhere, right? You can resurrect any place. All right, let me just thank Mary Aline for the sticker. Thank you, Mary Aline. Really, really appreciate it. And RDF, I think I mentioned that earlier. And Nathaniel, his first super chat. And Jake, thank you, Jake. And Thought Criminal, thank you, Thought Criminal. And Cassandra, thank you, Cassandra, who's also going to arrange for me a talk in Canada. And Arthur just became a member. Thank you, Arthur, for being a member. And Debate Anything, who is a Rothbard fan, will forgive him in this instant because he just became a member. And one of our goals is going to be to convince him otherwise vis-a-vis Rothbard. And then Cook says Detroit versus everybody. I don't know what that means. But Detroit is coming back, people. There's good news in the world. Stop being so down on everything, you've gotta realize that there's some good news in the world. And how much better does it get than one of the great American cities? I mean, a city I would never live in because it's too damn cold, but one of the great American cities actually making a comeback. And yeah, I mean, when I went there, 10, 12 years ago, what a dump. What an unbelievable dump. I think I did a radio show from the old, this beautiful, I think I did it twice. I went to the actual radio facility. I forget the guy's name, really good radio talk show host who was friendly to Ayn Rand and sympathetic. And it was in one of these beautiful Art Deco buildings in downtown Detroit. But it was so sad because it was so beautiful. Even the elevator doors were like these engravings, and it was just beautiful, And anybody remember who the talk show host was? I don't remember. Anyway, a lot of dynamism, a lot of work still to do. But there were outdoor concerts. They did the NFL draft in downtown Detroit. Yeah, a lot of these beautiful, Michigan Central Station is this office building that looks beautiful. So maybe that's the building that I'm talking about. Anyway, pretty cool. No, I don't think it was Mark Scott. At least that name doesn't ring a bell. But anyway, it was a long time ago. I know the guy who took me there. I could always ask him, but haven't seen him many, many years. All right. More good news. I don't know if you can stand so much good news. Scott, you might want to leave until I come back later. More good news. Harvard University. Harvard, of all places, Harvard. Harvard University's faculties of the arts and sciences is no longer going to require diversity and inclusion and belonging statements for faculty hiring. I mean, this is almost, too good to be true. Harvard University. Now, they're following MIT. You remember MIT did this, a week or two ago? It says here last month, but last month was last week. So MIT led on this one. But isn't it pretty astounding, really astounding, that Harvard, the bastion of woke, the bastion of DEI, the center of everything, in many ways, the center of much of what is wrong with America, Harvard is now doing away with diversity, inclusion, and belonging statements. I mean, this is a major victory. This is a major event. It's not small time. It's small in a sense. It's just one erosion in the whole thing. But this comes after, we should note that in April, Harvard reinstated, here's another one that's just shocking. Harvard reinstated standardized testing. And of course, it comes after Harvard's defeat in front of the Supreme Court, where Harvard said it cannot discriminate based on race anymore in admissions. So they reintroduced standardized testing. That'll make it very difficult for them to deny Asians a place because Asians are very, very good at standardized testing. There's now a major movement within Harvard to get rid of DEI statements across the entire faculty, not just in the arts and sciences, but everywhere. And also the potential of getting rid of service statements for candidates. Hopefully this is the beginning of something positive. By the way, there's a Council of Academic Freedom at Harvard, which is led by people like Steven Pinker, that have proposed urging the university as a whole to stop using diversity statements and making other changes to make Harvard a university that's based on merit again. So again, I don't know if it's peak woke, but it certainly seems like we're seeing a slow retreat, even in the bastions of woke. Jennifer is asking, were you in the Penobscot building in Detroit? I don't know. I mean, a name of a building, I don't know. I don't remember what. If I saw a picture of the building, I might remember it. If I saw a picture of the elevators, I might remember them. But I don't remember the name of the building, so I don't know. All right, a few other pieces of good news, maybe less offensive, but good news nonetheless. We now have results from the world's first personalized mRNA. And I know, block your ears because you don't want to hear this. This is that one where isn't Bill Gates supposed to implant a chip in your brain through these? Anyway, the first personalized mRNA cancer vaccine for melanoma. And the results are astounding. The vaccine was given to people who had stage 3, stage 4 melanoma. People who have stage 3, stage 4 melanoma and it's removed usually have 49%, they have a significant risk of it coming back and them dying. Well, it turns out that this vaccine dramatically lowers the risk of dying from the disease and lowers the risk of recurrence after 3 years. I think that's the limit of the study, was 3 years, which is huge. The average risk of recurrence after surgery for a cohort of advanced cancer patients was 50%, and this lowers that by 50%. mRNA, who would have thunk? I mean, I thought mRNA was killing people left and right. But it turns out that actual doctors doing actual research who are actually trying to save people's lives versus the many doctors online who are just trying to make money off of scaremongering people and off of trying to create cult-like followings. Real doctors are actually using this amazing technology that saved the lives of hundreds of thousands, millions really, of people around the world during COVID. Now this technology has the potential to save huge numbers of people from cancer. This particular cancer, melanoma, affects more than 150,000 people annually. But if it works on this, I'm sure they have to tweak it for even cancer, because cancer is not one disease. Who knows? I mean, we are on the verge. I don't think it's literally on the verge as tomorrow, but we are on the verge in the next couple of decades, I think. And I hope to see it in my lifetime, but I'm sure many of you will see it in your lifetime. We are, I think, unquestionably on the verge of a real revolution in the way we treat cancer, in our ability to create vaccines, in our in our ability to actually deal with cancer, and to a large extent, the COVID vaccine will be responsible for that. That is the fact that Moderna and BioNTech, the two mRNA vaccine companies, made as much money as they did because both companies were actually cancer companies, but they struggled. But part of the struggle was not tech. Part of the struggle was capital. But the fact that they made so much money during COVID allowed them to plow that money into these cancer vaccines. And so far, at least, everything I'm reading about the mRNA cancer vaccines is unbelievably exciting and really, really positive. And on a number of cancer fronts, we talked about the vaccine yesterday, I think that the NHS is running a massive trial of on hundreds of thousands of people. That'll be amazing if we get positive results there. But yeah, I mean, it's, this capital that was created because of a tragedy. The capital was created because we needed the COVID vaccines, and they made a lot of money off of the COVID vaccines. That capital is flowed into the creation of cancer vaccines that might save the lives of millions more people over the years, and from horrible death. Kind of, if you've seen people die from cancer, you know how horrible of a death it is. And hopefully we can save people from that death through this technology. One other good news on the cancer front, and that is, and I'd like to include here stories from science and technology and startups and innovation with regard to this stuff, so that we realize that we live in a pretty amazing world in which technology and innovation is still happening and where progress is still happening. And there's a new blood test, and the new blood test can predict the risk of breast cancer returning. Somebody who had breast cancer, but breast cancer often returns, and when it returns, it's usually in a much more deadly form. Well, now we have a blood test that can predict the risk of breast cancer returning 3 years before any tumors show up on a scan, which is an unbelievable breakthrough, because it means that you can now treat the cancer before it actually is in the form of a tumor. Now, here we're talking about a disease that 2 million women are diagnosed of every year. It's the most prevalent type of cancer. And while treatment for breast cancer has improved over the years, if the cancer returns, it can return in much more advanced stages. So if you can identify it 3 years in advance, I'm not an expert, but what I do know, and what I've been told by doctor after doctor after doctor, by experts, is the sooner you can detect the cancer, the higher the probability that you can cure it, the higher the probability you can treat it. So having a blood test like this, fantastic news for women and their husbands and their kids and their fathers and pretty much everybody else. Good news for the human race, that to have this kind of test and to have this kind of technology and to have the ability to deal with all of this, to deal with cancer in such a ever-growing, effective way. All right, I want to talk about Hamas and Islam, and we're going to do that. Before that, I want to remind you of a few things. One is, I want to remind you this is a listener-supported show. I cannot do the show without contributions from you, the listener. Those contributions can be in the form of a monthly contribution, monthly support, by way of Patreon or PayPal. You can find the PayPal link on yaronbrooksshow.com/membership, or you can do it here by signing up for membership on YouTube, which is a different type of membership. I can't make all the memberships the same. I apologize. You can also do it through the use of the Super Chat. You can do it through the use of stickers. There's like a gazillion ways in which you can support the Yaron Brook Show. Please choose one. Choose one. Now, for those of you watching live right now, all 130 of you, the way you can really help the show continue to grow and continue to for me to continue to do this work and presenting all this stuff to you, including the good news that you get on things like cancer treatment and technology and advancement and so on, is to use the Super Chat feature right now and to support the show. We do have goals. Those goals do require, for a few people who can afford it, to come in and do like $50, $100 and more during a show. Otherwise, it's very hard to meet the goal from 5, 10. But the 5, 10s move us in the right direction. So please continue to do that and don't stop. And that is hugely beneficial. But reality is, we need that plus quite a bit more to really grow the show and to reach our target, which is 750 for a 3-hour show. We're on our second hour, and we've got a lot of room to get to where we need to be just for a 2-hour. Yeah, that's my pitch. That's my pitch. Anyway, let's talk about Hamas and Islam, because almost nobody talks about this. You just don't hear it, and this is true after 9/11. You know the authorities at least, but a lot of even just commentators. Al Qaeda were terrorists. What was that? Terrorists. We had a war on terrorism. That's it, terrorism. There was no real, and indeed more than that, according to President Bush, Islam was a religion of peace. Islam was, Islam was not at fault for 9/11. Islam was not at fault for Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda was some kind of aberration, a hijacking of a great and very peaceful religion. And the same is happening around Hamas. Almost nobody mentions the fact that Hamas is an Islamist organization. That everything it does, including the raping of women and the torturing of children and the torturing of adults, it does under the banner of Islam. Indeed, it received special permission. Its soldiers received special permission before entering Israel on October 7th from an imam in Gaza to rape, because Muslim soldiers are not supposed to do that unless they get permission. And then they get permission, then it's okay. They literally got permission. There's almost nothing made of the fact that Hamas is not just a group of thugs who just want power, who are just, masochists who want to see people suffer. They, for some inexplicable reason, hate Jews. Also, nothing is made of the fact that Hamas is just not another nationalist organization that just wants to establish a Palestinian state, any Palestinian state. And we heard from the Bernie Sanders advisor that Hamas just wants to establish a Palestinian state that looks like America, with a diverse group of people, all free, all enjoying individual rights under a rule of secular law. Where does this come from? The reality is that Hamas represents a major strand of Islam. A strand that is probably you have hundreds of millions, depending on the survey and depending on how you ask the question, hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world who support it. Hamas is not some aberration. It's not something crazy. It's not something out of the norm. Indeed, Hamas grew out of the Muslim Brotherhood movement. Hamas is a military arm of the Muslim Brotherhood of Palestine. The Muslim Brotherhood, as a political entity in Egypt, won the election right after the Arab Spring. Indeed, one could argue that the Muslim Brotherhood was the organization most responsible for the Arab Spring. Indeed, even in Syria, where there's a civil war, those fighting Bashar al-Assad are often Muslim Brotherhood, or people inspired by it, the Muslim Brotherhood of Syria. There is a very active Muslim Brotherhood organization in Jordan and pretty much everywhere else. It is the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia that are truly afraid of the Muslim Brotherhood. Although Saudi Arabia, for many years, actually was a bastion of the Muslim Brotherhood as they were kicked out of Egypt in the 1960s and early 70s. They were kicked out of Egypt and they went and taught in Saudi Arabia. Indeed, it's Muslim Brotherhood teachers who taught bin Laden. Bin Laden got his theology from the Muslim Brotherhood that led him to found Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was an organization, a terrorist organization, but an organization that shared an ideology with the Muslim Brotherhood, as did ISIS, with some variation. ISIS is maybe more militant. ISIS focuses much more on hatred of the Shia Islam, which dominates Iran, but the Shia is everywhere really in the Muslim world. ISIS hates the Shia almost as much as they hate non-Muslims. Muslim Brotherhood doesn't really have a huge problem with the Shia, and certainly doesn't place them in the same category as Jews or Christians. So what you have with Hamas is basically a military wing of the overall Muslim Brotherhood movement. The Muslim Brotherhood movement is a movement that has a significant presence in pretty much every Muslim country, I'd say a Sunni Muslim country in the world, including in the Far East, including in places like Indonesia and Malaysia. There are significant Muslim Brotherhood chapters over there. So what does the Muslim Brotherhood represent? The Muslim Brotherhood was founded in the late 1920s by oh God, I forget his first name, but Al-Banna was his family name, if you will, and it was founded in Egypt. And basically, what the Muslim Brotherhood advocates for is Islam. Islam as the ideology that must, the ideology of God, the ideology that must, dominate the world. Not just the Muslim world, but must dominate the world. The Muslim Brotherhood claims that the problems the Muslim world has, the reason the Muslim world is weak, the reason the Muslim world is poor, is because it has become too secular. It is because it does not take religion seriously enough. Hassan al-Banna is his name. It is because it doesn't take it enough. Because it has sinned against God by compromising on the principles of Islam, compromising on the principles of the Quran. It is because of that the Muslim world is being punished with the rise of the West, is being punished with weakness and poverty, is being punished with the fact that the West has militarily far stronger than they are. And that explains this punishment by God for not living up to the principles of Islam, explains their weakness. And that the only way for the Muslim world to rise up again and dominate and achieve what the great Arab empires and the great Ottoman empires achieved, which was not quite world domination, but came close. Massive, huge empires. They were the mightiest forces in the world by far. The only way that can be achieved, that can be returned, you can return to that glory of wealth and success, and even science and all of that, is a return to religion, to return to the Quran, a return to a consistent reading of the Quran, a consistent reading of religion. The Muslim Brotherhood advocates consistently, that the West is inherently corrupt, inherently decadent, inherently on the verge of failure, and it will indeed fail. It will indeed fail once once Islam returns to the foundation, ultimately God will reward virtue, will not allow vice. And the reality is that the Western world is driven by vice. And therefore, once the Muslim world regains its commitment to the Quran, its commitment to Islam, it will regain God's favor and therefore become the strongest power on the planet. And they are willing to wait. They realize that their primary responsibility is to educate Muslims to be better Muslims, to bring Muslims back to Islam, to dominate Muslim countries. They thought they had a shot in Egypt, and they kind of blew it. They had a Muslim Brotherhood president, but he pissed off the military, and he was gone after a while. Right? But, the Muslim Brotherhood is patient. All its different branches are patient. Now, the reason they're willing to work, for example, with Iran, which is Shiite and not Sunni, is because, even though the Shiites are wrong, they're still working on the side broadly of Islam, and they're willing to, Hamas would be willing to work with anybody. Muslim Brotherhood is willing to work with anybody for the defeat of evil, for the defeat of the West, for the defeat of the non-Muslims. So, Hamas is not some aberration. It's not some thing out of nowhere. It is an organization of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a massive organization within the Muslim world. And a massive organization committed to one thing, and that is practicing Islam the way they interpret it, consistent with its origins. And part of that is the idea, and part of the sinfulness of the Islamic world, for which they are paying a price under God, is the fact that the Muslims have allowed non-Muslims a foothold on Muslim territory. According to the Quran, according to the traditions, once a place is Muslim, it can never go back. Once a place is Muslim, it must always be Muslim. That is, it must always be ruled, owned by Muslims. There cannot be, for example, a Jewish state. There cannot be. Not because they particularly, not because necessarily it's just about Jews, but there cannot be a Jewish state in a place that used to be Muslim. Now, ultimately, they all agree the whole world needs to become Muslim, right? The whole world needs to be conquered by Islam, and only that is an acceptable outcome, and this is why it's a global jihad. And this is why when those students shout global jihad or global intifada, what that really means in the current terminology, in the current context, in the context of Hamas, is a global jihad. And what that means is the conversion of the entire world to Islamic rule, to living under Sharia law. And it can never be changed. It can never be changed. So the biggest sin Israel has committed is taking Muslim land, taking a land ruled by Muslims under the Ottomans and under the Arab empires before that, and making it into non-Muslim. And that is just unacceptable. Unthinkable, really. And, they're willing to wait as many generations as it takes to recapture that land. This is not about we have to capture it by the end of the year, we have to capture it tomorrow. That's why I don't think Hamas is panicking because they're losing in Gaza. They're not going anywhere. Their ideology is not going anywhere. Even if they die, the ideas keep going, and they're going to heaven, and they'll look down and observe the progress. You know, Nasrallah, who is the leader of Hezbollah, which is similar to Hamas, it's just from the Shiite branch, once said, the reason we will win is because we think in terms of centuries. The West thinks in terms of years. Nasrallah knows he will die before he sees Sharia rule over Lebanon and Palestine. I think he knows that. He doesn't care. He also knows he's fighting for a cause that is forever, and that ultimately he believes God is on the side of that cause and therefore will win. And you can't understand Hamas, you can't understand the Palestinians, you can't understand the Arab world, the Muslim world, if you don't understand this, if you don't understand the extent to which they are truly committed to this, and to the extent to which this is the belief system they have. Now, that doesn't mean they can't change. They can. They have free will. But it means that this is the dominant ideology, and to uproot it would require a real thrashing. And it's not even a military thrashing. Indeed, it's actually the case that even if Israel really defeated Hamas with overwhelming force, unencumbered by rules of engagement and so-called morality of war and all of that, it really crushed them, it still wouldn't win. Unless it was also willing to say, what we are defeating is not just the Palestinian people. Notice, not just Hamas, but not just Hamas and not just the Palestinian people. What we are defeating today is the ideology of Islamism, the ideology of Islamic totalitarianism, the ideology that believes that they can impose Sharia law on the world, on us, on anybody. And what we're defeating it is in the name of an alternative, in the name of individualism, in the name of reason, in the name of Western civilization, in the name of the Enlightenment, in the name of a superior ideology represented by superior weapons. But ultimately, what makes it superior is its advocacy for truth, advocacy for ideas that are consistent with human nature, and its rejection, thoroughly rejection of religion, but more broadly of mysticism. The real battle with Islam is an ideological one. We have to first know what we're fighting on our side. And we have to know our own virtues. We have to know our own value. And even if it's at the level of we're fighting for Enlightenment values, even if it's at the level of we're fighting for reason and individualism, we're fighting for political freedom, that would be great, even if they don't get objectivism, just that. And then we need to know what we're fighting against. We need to know that the enemy is a religious enemy. An enemy that believes that it has revealed truths that is superior to everybody else. And the only way to dislodge those truths is to prove to them that they are not. To prove to them that they will be defeated. To prove to them that their ideology is primitive, barbaric, anti-man, anti-life. And you do that with military victory and a clear message of the superiority of your own ideas. Hamas is not interested in establishing a Palestinian state. It will never, ever, 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 even if they say they do, They will never give up on the idea of throwing the Jews out of Palestine, where they're killing them all, putting them on boats, but basically making the entire area there, the entire state of Israel, a Muslim state. That is a foundational idea of their ideology, not just their political charter, of their fundamental ideology, of their religious ideology. Jews cannot have a state on Muslim land, period, ever. So once a Muslim Brotherhood preacher, this is in 2000, when the PLO was negotiating with Ehud Barak, and Israel almost gave the Palestinians everything they wanted, almost everything, except the right of return, so the Palestinians from refugee camps couldn't come back into Israel proper and take over their old homes and just live there. Anyway, this Muslim Brotherhood doctor of religion was asked if it would be permissible for Palestinian refugees to give up their land in Israel in exchange for compensation from the Israelis. If the Israelis would compensate them for it, could they give it up? And this is some of what he said. He said, the answer to your question is that a Muslim may sell land that is owned by him to whom he wants at the price that he wants, if he is selling to a citizen like himself. For in this case, while the land would be changing hands, it would remain generally within the circle of public property of the Ummah, the nation of Islam. And the deed to it should not be shifted to another nation. As to selling land or conceding it for any compensation, however high it may be, to another nation, be it represented by a state or the nationals of the state, it would be wrong by all means. Waiving the right to Muslim land is not only haram, forbidden by Sharia, it is one of the gravest sins, which make those who do them commit the great unbelief, apostasy. Furthermore, this land does not belong to those who own it and hold the deed to it. It is not the property of the Palestinian people alone. In fact, it is the property of the Muslim nation in all parts of the world, and should be defended with life and by every means at the disposal of Muslims. Islam stipulates for Muslims a religious duty if a part of their land is occupied by force by their enemies. This duty is that Muslims should go to war to restore that part and drive the enemy out of it, whatever the cost. Such fighting is a duty of all the people of the country, men and women alike. Now that is not an ideology you can negotiate with. That is not an ideology you can sign a peace deal with. That is not an ideology that is going to cede you 1 inch of land. And it's funny because if you've watched the debate I did with Saif, the Palestinian libertarian, who argued from the perspective of property rights, this basically means that there is no such thing as property rights for non-Muslims in Islam, that ultimately Muslims can take property away from anybody who's not a Muslim. And certainly there's no property rights under Islam for a state that is not Muslim. That is, for the people in a state that is not Muslim. Right? I mean, he literally says that the property is not of the Palestinian people alone, it's the property of all Muslims. That's not property rights. That's pure and utter collectivism. And he says he says that to sell Muslim land to people of another nation would be haram and would be the gravest of sins, which would make you apostate. Now, if you take religion seriously, you do not want to be an apostate. You do not want to be an apostate. So again, there is no negotiating with anybody affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. There is no negotiating with Hamas. There was no negotiating, settling with anybody who believes in Sharia law, Iran, Hezbollah. Literally, the only option Israel has is the complete and utter destruction of this ideology and the people who represent it. It's a complete and utter bringing them to their knees. Because they cannot compromise. They cannot compromise. If they compromise, i.e., they allow Jews to stay in, they allow Israel to exist, or they allow Israel to exist even as a tiny little place, even smaller than it is today, or they allow Jews to own land that was non-Muslim, or whatever, they are apostates, and they will die. So you can't understand their commitment to death without understanding their religion. And this is their religion. Now, I'm not saying this is Islam, because others interpret Islam differently, and I don't get into theological debates about what Islam actually means. This is their interpretation of Islam. This is how they interpret Islam. This is how they understand Islam. And unless we understand the nature of our enemy, there is no way to defeat an enemy you don't understand. There's no way to defeat an enemy you can't name. You have to know who they are, what they represent, what they stand for in order to defeat them. Hamas represents Islamic totalitarianism. Hamas is an Islamist group. Hamas is representative of tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of Muslims who believe in this version of Islam. Hamas is part of a Muslim Brotherhood network that extends across the world. It's in Europe. It's in mosques in the United States. It's everywhere, that needs to be crushed. Needs to be crushed. Because it is militant and committed to destruction of the West and committed to establishing Sharia law through coercion on all of us. And this is life or death. This is something we must fight. And it's shocking, shocking, that the United States is not embracing Israel completely and supporting everything that it does and more, given that we face exactly the same enemy here in the United States as Israel does, that Hamas and the Islamist movement generally is an enemy of the West, is an enemy of the United States. And those who side with Hamas are ignorant, evasive, and in many cases evil. Because once you understand what these people stand for, death and destruction, Sharia law on the entire world, once you understand that, supporting them can, is an act of evil. And any American administration that weakens Israel's hand in its ability to destroy Hamas is committing an evil act. All right. David just became a member. I made you a member. I gifted 5 memberships. Philip, Tiago, Dennis, David, and Z-Man all were gifted memberships. Don't thank me. Thank the algorithm. I just gifted 5 memberships, and they chose who to give them to. The algorithm did. All right, guys, we still got a goal to achieve. Goals are important to achieve. Fundraising goals are important to achieve. Keep the Yaron Brook show going. Keep Yaron Brook motivated. Keep the show healthy and flourishing. To do that, show your support with a chat, with a super chat, a sticker, or with a monthly contribution on Patreon. Subscribe stuff. I'll also say the Ayn Rand Institute is a sponsor of the show. While registrations for the in-person attendance at OCON are closed, you can still sign up for a virtual, watching the lectures on the internet from home. Not as much fun, nowhere near as much fun, but still better than nothing. So you can go to aynrand.org/start here, where there's a link to the application for or to register for a for the virtual pass for OCON. We're also being sponsored by Alex Epstein. Alex, of course, is the world expert on fossil fuel industry, world expert on climate change and all things energy. You can sign up to Alex's Substack, alexepstein.substack.com, where you can get his talking points. He'll take an issue that is in the news, that is hot, that everybody's talking about, related to energy or climate change or fossil fuels, and he'll give you the talking points. This is how to argue the right perspective. So he won't just criticize, right? Like some, he will actually give you the positive, what to actually say in response. And of course, finally, there's an Alex AI, which is a terrific tool. If you want to know what Alex thinks of X, just ask Alex AI, and you can sign up for that with, I think, a premium membership. alexepstein.substack.com. All right, let's see. We've got a bunch of super chats. Not enough, though. We need more, particularly in the $20 to $50 to $100 range. Let's see. Oh, I do want to thank a few people. Let me thank Wes for $50. Thank you, Wes. Really, really appreciate it. Jeffrey, thank you. Travis Gould, thank you. Who else here did I miss before? Frederick, third super chat. Gail, thank you. And yeah, I think that catches us up. All right, so let's look. Andrew is asking. Andrew says, the anti-oppression forces argue on a more fundamental framework regarding Gaza that the pro-Israeli forces, and though their morality is corrupt, their emotional fervor attracts the young and idealists, the good needs principles. I don't know that I got the grammar of that sentence right. Probably not. The anti-oppression forces, these are the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas forces, argue on a more fundamental framework regarding Gaza than the pro-Israel forces. Okay, I see. And though their morality is corrupt, their emotional fervor attracts the young and idealistic, the good needs principle. Yes, but you also can't, if the young idealists for a moment looked at what the ideals they are advocating for actually are. If they actually examined this new ideology that they are jumping to embrace, then I think some of them at least would be really shocked and horrified. But the very fact that they're not even looking, they don't really care, or that they have looked and still embrace it, is what is so disturbing. The level of evasion, or if they're not evading, the level of nihilism is truly shocking. Yes, there's some vague, emotionalistic, moral certainty, moral excitement, idealism. But what is the ideal? What is the ideal? What is the ideal? A Sharia law over everything that is the Middle East. That's the ideal. That's what they're striving for. I mean, indeed, Sharia law over the whole world. If you really understand it, I can get Palestinian nationalism. We want a state, or you want one, you could even argue we want one state in Israel, but that has both Arabs and Jews. Yeah, okay. But that's not idealism. There's no ideal there. The only idealism they can be fighting for is true Sharia law, true domination of Islam. And if that's their idealism, then they're just nihilists, and they're just out to see stuff burn. And to the extent that they don't know what the ideals they're fighting for, they're not ideals, and they're just evasive. In this case, so I worry about they have moral fervor. No, I mean they're emotional. I agree with that. I'm not sure they're idealistic. Not in any reasonable sense of idealism. Kabuta, also from Norway. You see tons of people from Norway and no invitations to speak. Come on, people. Organize a Norwegian event at a university in Norway. Invite me. Yaron at YaronBrookShow.com. Kabuta says, new technology might replace jobs, but also makes labor more productive. It is claimed in economics that the result is increase in real wages. But why should the capital owners let the surplus be shared with the worker? What surplus? There is no surplus. I don't know what surplus you're talking about. That's a Marxist myth. So the capitalist hires the worker under certain terms. And since the worker is not a slave, the worker, as he becomes more productive, if the owner of the means of production doesn't pay him what he thinks justifies his added productivity, then he will go somewhere else. So competition will always drive compensation to match productivity. But there is no surplus. This is purely Marxist BS. There's such a thing as return on capital. There's such a thing as profit. There's such a thing as wealth creation. There's no such thing as surplus. There's no such thing as the worker creates something and the capitalist gets something for nothing. That is BS. That is Marxist nonsense. What the capitalist is getting is a return on his capital. And sometimes a return on his effort, and a return on his entrepreneurial skill and his entrepreneurial ability, and on his entrepreneurial, talents. There's no surplus. It's not true that the worker creates all value, and then he only gets some and there's a surplus. He creates the least amount of value, and that's why ultimately he gets the least. Well, he doesn't get the least because overall, but he doesn't get the most. So the whole terminology of surplus is a Marxist terminology that is just blatantly wrong. Industry, production, creation, innovation, anything, new technology has to be created. And there's a return on creation, which is a return on entrepreneurship. So you got to get away from that. But the reason the capital owner ends up paying the workers based on their level of productivity is because if not, then the workers will be competed away. And that's how competition works. That's how basic market competition works. Not to mention that a good owner also wants to motivate his employees, wants them to be more productive because he benefits when they are, and therefore encourages them increase in productivity, and encourages increase in productivity by matching rewards to that productivity. And that's why owners give bonuses and raise wages and do all the things you'd expect in order to attract talent and maintain talent. Ian, having been so I mentioned the socialist student groups during the 60s riots in Colombia were supporting ending the war, but really as a means to an end of expanding socialism at home. Can you expand on the correlations today? Yeah, I mean, in many respects, you could argue that the students in the 1960s, in significant ways, were real idealists. They were pacifists and socialists. And they wanted something, and they believed in something. It was vague and weird, and there was a tinge of nihilism there, and it was certainly subjectivist and certainly driven by the emotional state. But they wanted socialism. What do these protesters want today? What do they want? Do they want socialism? Not really. They even know what socialism is? No. Do they want progress? No. What do they want? Basically, they want the destruction of ability. They want to destroy the so-called oppressors. But who are the oppressors? By definition, the oppressors are the successful. By definition, the oppressors are the able. By definition, the oppressors are the people who've achieved something. What the modern left, what these demonstrators and the woke professors behind them are nihilists of the worst kind. They want to destroy the world in which we live. They want it thoroughly destroyed. That's what motivates them. That's what drives them. And in that sense, they're much worse than the 60s. And you can see this at the very least in the 60s, you can understand them, right? They're against an unjust war. Yes. Objectivism was against that war as well. Objectivism was against the draft as well. So there was a semblance of legitimacy to what they were seeking in the 1960s. But what are they seeking today? The destruction and annihilation of a good state. In the annals of history, a really good state. All they're seeking today is destruction, death, murder. What's the positive? And why is it relevant to them? Like, the kids in the 60s, they were demonstrating so that they would not be drafted. At least that's one motivation. What are the kids today demonstrating for? For Palestinians in a far-off land that have no impact on their own, have the right to kill Jews over there? But it's over there. Doesn't affect them. America's not sending troops. They're not going to go over there. Doesn't affect them and their families. So this is why they are so much. They're so much more nihilistic than anything the 60s had. Paul, Islam hatred of the Jews is not inexplicable. It comes directly from Muhammad in hadiths, because Jewish rabbis in Medina rejected him as a Messiah. Yeah, I mean, sure. But not every religion takes that and carries it forward and maintains it forever, right? And the hatred of Jews is actually less than the Christian hatred of Jews. At least in a traditional sense, there was far more anti-Semitism in Europe than there was in the Muslim world until the 19th century. But there was anti-Semitism even in the Christian world, even in the Muslim world. So they're anti-Jews, and Muhammad was an anti-Jew, and he was shunned by the Jews. The Jews kept their religion. They didn't see him as the true prophet. And they fought against him in some of the battles, and they lost, and so. Shahzabad, thank you. Thank you for the support. Really appreciate it. Let's see. Adam says, censoring history of Christendom, censored history of Christendom. Every crusade started with murder of local Jews. The fact that DNA from DNA is, at the end of the crusade, the entire population of Ashkenazi Jews in all of Europe, north of Spain, was only 270 individuals. Yes, I mean, the crusades, particularly the early crusades, the first, second, and third, I think, all basically involved, rallying Christians in Europe and then traveling through Europe down into the Middle East through what was the Byzantine Empire and ultimately into Palestine. And what happened on the way was mass slaughters of Jews on the way. They slaughtered Jews left and right on the way, and partially it was a bloodlust to get everybody excited, to get everybody kind of organized, to get them in the mood to go and continue doing the slaughtering in the Holy Land. But the Crusades involved absolutely a mass slaughter of the Jews, and I have seen this number that north of Spain, and Spain, of course, was still Muslim in those days, so that's why the Jews were protected there, relatively speaking, that north of Spain, in what is today Western, Central, Eastern Europe, including Italy, there were only 270 Jews by the time I can't remember if it was the first, second, or third crusade finished with them, and that all Ashkenazi Jews today, all Eastern European and Central European Jews today, basically come from those 270 individuals who survived the genocide of Jews by Christian crusaders. Religion is brutal, guys. And religion is one thing because it's brutal for the individual, but religion with political power, religion on the warpath, run for your lives, runs for your lives. And this is why we should do everything to fight, Christian nationalism in America. You want to be a Christian, stay home, be a Christian. Don't bring it into politics. Akira Felix. Can Trump win the election without going to jail? Oh, without going to jail. Yeah, no, I think Trump can win the election. I think it's going to be very close. And I think that he has a good chance to win. And he might win by a big margin. I mean, that would be horrible, but he might win. Right now, he's leading in the popular vote, which would be the first Republican to win the popular vote in a long, long time. That would be really bad. Really, really, really bad. Nate, for those interested in creating content, becoming a professional intellectual, do you think a donation-based system like YBS is a good business model to make money off of one's effort? I don't know. It's one business model. I don't know that it's the best. It's not easy because it requires critical mass. So it's not easy to get started on a business model like this. I think Alex Epstein has a different business model where he is providing services to businesses and gets paid for those. And he gets paid, I think, a lot more than I can do here. But it really depends on what kind of content you want to produce, where you want to produce it, You could make money off of speaking fees, although, again, it's very difficult to do so. There's a lot of competition. It's very difficult to get chosen and to come and speak. Being a professional intellectual without an institutional support is very, very, very difficult. There are very, very few people who actually manage to do it successfully well. Enough to be able to really live off of. So, that would be my point, right? So it's difficult, and you have to look at every model and see, based on what you want to produce, based on what your talent is, what your skill set is, where can you have the most impact, and where can you make the most money? Not easy. I mean, if you think about the number of intellectuals that make money by themselves without an institution, it's not that many. And, you know, good money, right? I mean, if you live on a minimal, then they're more. Cook says, Roundup 6.4 sounds like a game on Nintendo 64. Okay. Oh, News Roundup 6.4. Okay. Detroit Lions, a finally competitive team. That's good. More for a Detroit Renaissance. Debate Anything says, I'm also from Norway. Excellent. I'm telling you, there are a lot of people in Norway. Thoughts on Argentina? You can search my past shows. I've talked about Milei many times. I think there are a lot of short videos of me out there with Milei, about Milei, and I've met Milei. 2 months ago I met Milei, and I'm very positive about Milei. I like Milei generally. I wish he wasn't an ANCAP. I wish he wasn't anti-abortion. I wish he wasn't religious. But my wishes don't bring reality about. He's very good in economic theory. He knows his economics inside out. And he's lecturing all over the world to world leaders and other groups on economics. He has a very good foreign policy. And basically this is what tilted it for me. He's got a foreign policy that's very not ANCAP, right? Very not anarchist. He supports Israel, he supports Ukraine, and he supports the United States. He's resisted the BRICS, he's turned them down. He's canceled a order of planes from China and bought used F-16s instead. I mean, he's good. He's not perfect. Again, he's very anti-abortion, and he plays the populist card too much, and he compromises on a bunch of stuff, and he has formed a coalition with the Argentinian conservatives who are not good at all. But given the condition of Argentina is in, he's about as good as it is. And then the question is, will they let him get anything done? Will he be able to do the things necessary to do and to change and to actually be successful? And I don't know. I'm not an expert to that extent in terms of the workings of Argentinian politics. But he's recommending the right things. He's putting in front of Congress the right things. He's pushing for the right things. He's talking about dollarizing the economy still. And I wish him luck, and I hope he's successful. And I gave him a copy of that book, Free Market Revolution, and he said he would read it. So maybe we'll have a little bit of impact on him. I don't know. We can hope so. ANCAP is not a form of capitalism. It's a form of negating capitalism, yes. Urban Porcupine, what caused Detroit's downfall? Was this due to labor unions? A lot of things caused Detroit's downfall. Labor unions certainly played a role. It was also a policing policy, very, very left-wing policing policy that basically handed the streets over to the criminals, just as other cities have experimented with it, and they got the same results. So they got high crime rates, which resulted in people just leaving. So they had a very bad mayor who instituted really bad police policies. Coleman Young, Jennifer says, was the name of the mayor. It also had to do with the fact that Michigan became a state that was heavily regulated, heavily controlled, heavily licensed. So that dynamism of a Silicon Valley-like place that it had in the early part of the 20th century slowly went away. But really, it's the mayors of Detroit, the controls, the regulations, and the policing. The policing was the thing that really destroyed it. And what happened was that the productive people all left Detroit and moved to the suburbs. And if you visit the suburbs of Detroit, many of them are thriving, and many of them have done very, very well, even as Detroit has completely tanked, right? So that is it. It's absolutely not manufacturing jobs going to China. That's just a myth that keeps persisting. Very few manufacturing jobs went to China. We manufacture more stuff today in America than we ever did before. Jobs got lost to automation, to technology. 90% of the manufacturing jobs that went away, 90%, I think, yes, 90% of the manufacturing jobs that went away because of automation. The others went away because of Mexico and China and other countries. But 90% of that, economists have looked at this over and over again, 90% of them. It's just, you know, politicians never want to cite economists because that'll get, don't let facts get in the way of your theory. It's easier to blame China. But the fact is that when jobs go away because of technology, you don't lose jobs. More jobs are created than are lost. So, and indeed, look at unemployment in the United States today. It's 3.4% or something. That's about as low as it can get. There is no unemployment in the U.S. Everybody who wants a job has a job. And there are lots of jobs left unfilled. So the United States has lots of jobs, tons of jobs. Many of them are high-paying jobs. They go unfilled. So there's no problem of jobs. It's not jobs disappearing, not even from Detroit. The problem is crime. And then everybody goes to suburbs, and the jobs are in the suburbs, and nobody wants to live in Detroit, and houses are abandoned, and people leave the city because nobody wants to live with filth and violence, and then employers leave, and then there's nobody employs anybody downtown because nobody wants to go to work downtown. It becomes a competitive disadvantage. So the first thing you have to do, and I assume Detroit has done a decent job at this over the last 10 years, is increasing policing, is limiting crime. And I think crime is down, even though it's still high, it's down. And only then do you get everything else. Wesley, how differently will Iran behave once they acquire an atomic weapon? Will they start a nuclear war with the U.S. or Israel and next neighboring countries? They won't start a nuclear war because they would lose, and they don't want to do that. But they will get more and more and more aggressive with their neighbors. I don't know that they'll annex, but they will even, and I think this is one of the big fears, they will incentivize strongly the Shiite minority in Saudi Arabia to potentially rise up against the Sunnis, against the ruling class. And most of the oil, by the way, in Saudi Arabia is in the Shiite territories. They will instigate Shiite rebellions all over. And at the same time, they will sponsor agents to commit terrorist attacks in Europe. They will become more and more and more aggressive. Everything they do now, they will do more of. Because they won't fear retaliation. Simon, can all these great medical achievements resulting from the COVID vaccine excuse whatever evil Fauci caused? No, but the vaccine was not a result of any evil. The vaccine was just pure good, right? The evil was maybe the government invested money in it, but in the kind of world we live in, I'm not sure there was an alternative. But the vaccine there was no evil in the vaccine. The vaccine had nothing to do with Fauci, although he took credit for it. The vaccine was the vaccine. And Fauci had no involvement in that. So no, it's not, there's no trade-off here. It's not you have to excuse Fauci's evil in order to accept the vaccine, in order to accept mRNA. mRNA was happening irrespective of the evils Fauci committed. Michael, you said yesterday being smart doesn't matter. What did you mean by that? I don't remember. I mean, I said it in a context. What was the context? What was I talking about, right? I mean, the meaning is going to come from the context that I talked about. I assume that I meant something like what matters is moral character. What matters is you know, what you make of yourself, not how smart you are. I don't think being smart matters that much. I think what matters in life is your moral character, is the values you stand up, what your values are, and what you're willing to fight for, and what kind of life you live. And that is not a question of intelligence. Michael, I forgot to ask Peter this yesterday, but is paying hush money to keep something quiet like Trump did a First Amendment protection activity or a form of blackmail? It's neither. I mean, the blackmail is the person asking for money in order to not reveal the truth. But there's no First Amendment here because the government is not involved. I don't know there's really a crime here in and of itself in even the form of blackmail, although there might be laws against blackmail. But yeah, there's certainly no First Amendment issue because it's privately negotiated settlement. Michael, also from yesterday, do you no, you don't need consent or permission to take pictures or videos in public. The First Amendment also protects freedom of the press, not just political speech. Yeah, it doesn't protect even just political speech. It protects all speech. All speech. As long as it's from your private property. As long as you're not violating somebody else's private property by engaging in that speech. You didn't have to write to go on my show and say whatever you want to say. I can block you. You don't have a right to go on my street and say whatever you want to say. But if you want to rent an amphitheater and the owner of the amphitheater doesn't have a problem with what you want to say, you can say whatever you want in that amphitheater. If you buy a radio station, you have a right to broadcast whatever you want from that radio station. That doesn't cover just political speech, and it doesn't cover just freedom of the press. It covers, all speech. That does not mean that you have consent or permission for pictures. I mean, maybe you do in a public space. There's no assumption of privacy. Maybe that's true, but it doesn't derive from freedom of speech or freedom of the press. Is Schrodinger's cat a Kantian cat? The explanation of the phenomena seems like it comes straight out of Critique of Pure Reason. I think the explanation is, I have a feeling Schrodinger was trying to say something that might have been of value in the context in which he said it, but as a metaphysical statement, it's complete bunkers, it's complete nonsense. But it was trying to illustrate something about quantum mechanics. I can't remember what, I don't really care that much, but it's something. But as a metaphysical statement, as a statement in science, that the cat can be both dead and not dead at the same time is just pure stupidity, right? I mean, metaphysically stupidity. And it's just not real, it's just not true, right? Michael says, the infrastructure in the Northeast isn't bad because it's old. It's because of rent control and other draconian statist policies preventing modernization. I mean, yeah, there are plenty of statist policies preventing modernization, but the reality is it's old. You can go to cities that have a lot of wealth and might not even have rent control. And still, big portions of them are old, and it's expensive to refurbish. It's expensive to knock down old buildings and rebuild. It's expensive to improve infrastructure. It's not simple. In some ways, it's cheaper to build new, build from scratch. So it doesn't, even in a relatively free country, you would find the Northeast have old infrastructure that runs less well than, let's say, in the Southwest, which is all new. So, for example, Southwest was built for cars, so roads are bigger. The Northeast was built for, some of it at least, was built for a lot fewer cars, so everything is much narrower. To clean all the soot off of the buildings that is accumulated is just costly and time-consuming. Don't have to do that in the West because it's all new. The soot hasn't accumulated yet. Apollo Zeus, do you have any tips on how to seduce a woman? No, I do not. I do not. You seduce a woman. A woman needs to want to be seduced, and she has to want you. So, be a great man. Be a man that a woman would want to have. Be a man that a woman would want to be with. Be a man that a woman would want to to like and, find ways to show her that you are that man. I don't think there's a gimmick, at least not a good woman. I'm sure there are women who can be seduced by a line, by a particular attitude that you put on for a few hours, by something like that, by all these pickup artists that have the tips for you, right? But is that the woman you want? A woman that you want is not the kind of woman that is going to be seduced by a gimmick. A woman you want is going to be seduced by who you are. That's what's going to seduce her. And you have to show her who you are. That's on you. Apollo Zeus, is slap and tickle pinching women, scratching a man's back, or love biting considered S&M? No, I don't think so. I mean, unless it crosses a line where there's real pain involved. But, and it depends how deep those scratches are. It certainly could be. So, yeah, I mean, it's all an issue of degree, I think, at that point. Generally, I'm not big on pain as an associated with sex or pleasure or love. So I'm not big on that. S&M does not appeal, even in its mildest forms. Someone told me objectivity is a myth because your mind will always find proof to support whatever you believe, and it will ignore anything that goes against it. How would you respond to this? I'd say maybe yours does. I mean, we are not automatons where our mind is programming to... we're not automatons just programmed to be a particular way, to do a particular thing to support a particular argument. We have choices to make. And you can choose to ignore reality or you cannot. And this is the fundamental issue in morality. And most people just want to confirm their biases. But that's immoral. Morality says no. You've got to look at reality. You've got to engage with reality. You've got to focus and think and use reason to discover what is true. And that's what it means to be objective, to be focused on reality. All right, Kabutao, by surplus, I meant increased productivity from technology, not Marxist BS. Good. But if need for labor decreases while technology increases productivity, why would owners give it away? Not that they should. Well, again, because the reality is that the worker, because of this technology, is now more productive. He can produce more. And therefore, somebody else could hire that worker away, as long as they had that technology, and pay him just a little bit more than what you're paying him. Because there's more profit that he can use in order to pay him. And then you can look, wait a second, so let's say you were paying the worker $5. And for the $5, he was making you a profit of $2. And now, for the $5, he's making you a profit of $4. But he's probably also making your competitor a profit of 4 or 5 or whatever it is, right? A higher profit. So your competitor says, yeah, I want that worker. So he offers him, where were we at 4? 4.5 to come work for him. So you say, oh, wait a minute. No, I want this worker. And at 5, I'm still making a profit more than I did before we introduced the technology. So I'll pay him 5, and you're paying 5.5, and I'll pay him 6. And in the end, you'll end up at the same profit rate. So your cost of labor will rise so that your percentage profit is about the same because you're getting a return on whatever it is the capitalist put in as an investment. I mean, that's, again, the theory, right, simplistically. And you'd have to elaborate on how that works in real life, but that's basically the idea. Competition drives the wages up because it's not just your machine made your workers more productive. That same machine would make any workers more productive. And now I can pay them a little bit more. Debate anything. Are you open to debate Liquid Zulu on YouTube? I don't know who Liquid Zulu is. He's an anarcho-capitalist and an open objectivist, 1776 enthusiast, brought it up in live chat. No, not really. I don't debate anarcho-capitalists. I've debated anarcho-capitalists, but I'm careful in who I debate. I've debated Brian Kaplan. I debated an anarcho-capitalist in Poland a few years ago. That's online. I've kind of debated Michael Malice on Lex Friedman's show. I'm really not that interested in debates on anarcho-capitalism. I've also written on anarcho-capitalism. I've got an article with Don Watkins that I think extensively, that ultimately refutes the whole idea of anarcho-capitalism. So, read that, and then we could talk. I'm just not interested in debating somebody on YouTube, even with 5,500 subscribers. I mean, if they were, 5.5 million subscribers, I'd consider it. But I've really no interest otherwise. And again, go watch my debates with other NCAPs and more importantly, read my article. Read my article on, anarchy. I think that's more important. I'm going to post a link to it because I think in an article, you can make arguments that you're not going to make as thoroughly in a debate. So here it is. It's an article I co-authored with Don Watkins, read this. Tell your friends at Liquid whatever to read this as well. And if it's not convincing, then I'm probably not going to be convincing. But I did debate Brian Kaplan and have debated others. You can find it online. Just look Yaron Brook Anarchy debate or whatever, ANCAP or whatever, and you'll find it. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you to all the super chatters. Really appreciate the support. Thank you to all the people asking questions, everybody in the chat, everybody listening live, everybody listening after the fact on a podcast, on a YouTube, whatever it is. Don't forget to support the show with a contribution on Patreon or on yaronbrookshow.com/membership. And I'm sure I'm forgetting other stuff that I'm supposed to tell you, but yeah. Thank you. See you all tomorrow, same time, same place. Bye, everybody.